The Alldus podcast is brought to you by Alldus International, supplying your expert AI and digital transformation staffing needs across the US and Europe. Today, you are listening to our AI in Action series, where leading minds in AI from across the world share their story, success, and advice. AI in Action cuts through the hype and explores the true impact of artificial intelligence in our world today.
You're listening to AI in Action. I'm your host, JP Valentine. Our guest today is Matthew Greving. Matthew is the VP of Machine Learning and Platform Technologies at iBio Inc. Matthew, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, JP. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, we're delighted to have you. So Matthew, let's start with yourself, please, as we do with all of our guests. Could you give us an overview of your journey in technology, from where you got started, some of the roles you've held along the way, and what's led you to where you are today as the VP of ML and Platform Tech at iBio?
Probably like many people who are involved in software engineering, computational careers, I was hacking away at computers, even going back to probably 12, 13 years old, started hacking away on an old Commodore. And that really initiated my love for computers. I studied computer science and then actually worked about 7 or 8 years as a software engineer doing kind of massively parallel compute back when they called it big data. And during that time, I always had this love for human health, again, going back to a very young age, particularly this idea of health span. Not necessarily living to 200 years old, but trying to stay as active and as healthy as I can for as long as I can. And so I lived through the internet boom and burst of the early 2000s. And during that time, I actually had an opportunity to go back and finish my PhD for my second love, which was human health. And I finished a PhD in biochemistry and biophysics. And I realized right away the power of integrating computation with biological discovery. And during my PhD work, I got into utilizing computation and high throughput lab methods, big data kind of lab methods, to interrogate the immune system, and learned a lot about the immune system during my PhD studies and how it works and how to interpret the binding interactions, how the immune system interacts with certain molecules, and then utilize that really throughout the rest of my career in drug discovery and diagnostics discovery. And as ML started to get more and more advanced, incorporating machine learning much more, particularly at the latter parts of some work I did with a diagnostics company that was called HealthTel, and came as a result of some of my graduate work. And that really gave us that kind of initial, we were using graph nets. We gained some real insight into how we could potentially design molecules that could pull certain antibodies out of the immune system. And so that immediately brought to this idea we could use this to discover drugs, a particular class of drugs called antibody therapeutics that are responsible for some of the kind of biggest breakthroughs, and particularly in oncology treatment in recent years. And so that actually resulted in us being able to raise some money to start a company called RubrYc Therapeutics, which I was a co-founder of. And we built a technology to really enable difficult therapeutic antibody discovery, using much more ML-enabled engineering approaches. And that ultimately was acquired by iBio. And now we've continued to build that technology for our own internal drug discovery, as well as partnering with collaborators on particularly challenging targets and drug modes of action.
Thank you for the background, Matthew. Super helpful and really speaks to your passion for the space. And it also shows the crossover of your background on the pure sciences side and how you adapted and started to introduce modern technology, being ML in particular. You talked about the journey for RubrYc as a co-founder and CTO, then becoming part of iBio. Tell us all about iBio, who you are, what you do, mission of the business, and then let's jump into how the AI and ML side is helping with these therapeutics.
So really our mission is to enable the next era of therapeutic antibodies. And, since about 2014, therapeutic antibodies, this particular biologics class, basically utilizing those antibodies, our immune system that we have in each of us as drugs, it's had a rapid growth, but it's actually been slowing a little bit in recent years. And that is largely due to the fact that maybe some of the low-hanging fruit targets for these antibody therapeutics have been scooped up. And actually, there's tremendous saturation on a relatively small number of targets, drug targets. And so our motivation with the technology is really how do we continue to bring the high impact to patients that antibodies can realize for these very challenging targets that have been unattainable or difficult to address using conventional methods of antibody discovery. So that's really our motivation.
For people listening who are not as familiar with the space, particularly in the advancements within biotech and how AI and ML is having a significant impact into both the acceleration of the research and improvements of the treatments, are there any recent examples that you could share with us of the success being had at iBio, which could give evidence to just how impactful this space is and how exciting it's becoming over recent years?
So there's a couple examples, even going back to RubrYc, that we've now continued to develop those therapeutics at iBio. We have 3 targets. I'll highlight one, for example. There's a particularly high value class of drug targets called GPCRs. And these are very important proteins in each of us, and they sense effectively signals from outside the cell and transduce them into the cell. But they're very difficult to hit with antibody therapeutics. And so we use traditional drug discovery approaches to try to get an antibody therapeutic against a particular GPCR. It's called CCR8. And we got 0. And, as a small company, a startup at RubrYc, that was actually a very expensive failure. We then deployed our technology where we engineered using AI. We have a kind of an AI engineering engine, a real small focused embodiment of that part of the protein that sticks outside the cell. And what that allows you to do is really focus your discovery, your antibody discovery, on just those little parts that are sticking outside the cell. And that actually was a success. And now it's one of our latest stage molecules actually in our preclinical pipeline, where we basically flipped a complete failure using traditional methods on its head to having actually, we think, one of the best CR8 antibody therapeutics out there right now when we evaluate it against the current benchmarks. So that's one example, and we actually have a number of other examples as well where traditional methods gave us completely 0 molecules, and we actually got a number of molecules using our technology that's AI-enabled to engineer these small pieces of our protein target and focus our discovery on those small pieces versus using the traditional kind of larger protein and hope you find something on the right spot, which for difficult targets is rare.
Your role oversees machine learning and the platform as a whole. Can you describe what that looks like from the overall team size, the backgrounds of the individuals, and a typical project lifestyle? What's it like day to day to work on the ML and platform team at iBio?
Yeah, super important question, JP. The thing that I've tried to really hire for, but it's unfortunately exceptionally rare, are people that can cross discipline between the computation and the laboratory methods. At least having some kind of first principles understanding of what we're doing in the lab so that they understand the data and understand the experimental design. Now, the result of that is that we have a top A player team, but also, since those people are still quite rare, that have that AI, ML, computational knowledge with some solid understanding of biochemical drug discovery knowledge. It's a small team, but the cool thing is that AI really is a force multiplier in the sense that if you get the right people, you can actually do a lot with a relatively small team. So we've really emphasized at RubrYc and even now at iBio, how do we build the team such that they can cross between speaking with laboratory scientists, understanding the data, participating in the experimental design so that when those experiments are done, they can utilize those data. They understand the data well enough to train models, do all sorts of analyses on those data.
You are listening to the Alldus podcast. When you're looking to scale your team, or if you are interested in showcasing your company in a future episode, reach out today. Or if you're in the market for a new role, visit our website to view open positions, www.alldus.com.
I want to spend some time now talking about from where you are today with iBio and when you start to look ahead at the next chapter for the growth and evolution of the business. Obviously, your role has evolved from being a founder at RubrYc and then becoming part of the iBio family. And the last few years in this space has been incredibly interesting from the developments being made, some of which you've shared with those examples. But it feels like we're only just getting started and there's a lot more to be excited about down the line. When you look at the project roadmap, the plans for iBio, particularly focusing on the near term, the next 2 years, what are some of the things that you're most excited about? What can we expect to see? And if you guys continue to be successful, what milestones are you working towards?
The thing that's got me the most excited, JP, is this idea of training on multimodal data. And I actually look at the world, I've been in this long enough now, as pre-AlphaFold and post-AlphaFold. And that has been a huge exponential improvement in our ability to look at protein structure. But that's just one part of the equation, particularly for drug discovery. We need to basically map that protein sequence, the protein structure, to a particular function. And when I'm talking about function, that can be genomics, proteomics, it could be cellular imaging, it could be a number of things, metabolomics. So one thing that we're working on now, actually, even as we speak, is how do we incorporate higher dimensional readouts in our interrogation of all of these antibodies, hundreds of thousands at a time, so that not only do we get the best drugs faster, we can literally save months off of the process if we can just go straight to a high dimensional readout that tells us, does this drug bind the target that we want? Does it bind on the spot on the target that we want? Does it elicit the function that we want? Does the actual drug molecule have the properties that will actually enable us to develop it and produce it at scale and put it into animal and eventually human studies? Those are some of the dimensions that we're actively looking at now. I call them future developments because we haven't yet incorporated them into training models, predictive models that would allow us to be much more efficient at drug discovery for difficult targets. But we're actually starting to collect those data now. And I'm super excited about how can we really differentiate ourselves with the protein engineering capabilities we have now, and couple to that this kind of multimodal measurement so that we're linking the protein structure to the downstream function of the drug and building those large scale data sets. And basically how that's going to be useful is that there's a huge set of drug targets that are currently very difficult. I hesitate to say undruggable or inaccessible, but very difficult at the least to get therapeutic antibodies, not only to bind to, but also to elicit the right mode of action, therapeutic mode of action. If we're able to accomplish that, we can address a huge number of diseases and even make the treatments much more personalized with far, far fewer side effects for individual patients or individual patient populations. That's honestly what keeps me and I know my team going, this integration of multimodal data, AI, and then the downstream impact we can have if we're successful with the technology by addressing these kind of really difficult targets and diseases.
Finishing on the topic of the team, you and I were speaking off air about the importance of attracting the right talent, but also the right culture fit. And in the areas in which you're responsible for, it's incredibly difficult because a short supply, high demand, and there's such nuance in skill sets when you combine machine learning, but also with the scientific background. As someone who's had a lot of success hiring both during your time at RubrYc and now at iBio, you've got a formula that you've been working towards. I want to spend some time talking about what you look for, how you identify it, and particularly when we look at the next 2 years of growth, what opportunities are there going to be for people in this space who are interested to come and join you and help you along this mission?
We really want big ideas. I like to look for people that I don't know if it's fearless is the right word, but aren't afraid to take some calculated risks in the sense that, you know what, there's probably an 80% chance this idea, this experiment's going to fail. But in that 20% likelihood that it is successful, it's a step function change to the next level of efficiency or difficulty in target or complexity of therapeutic mode of action. So I would say that's actually the first characteristic I look for, even more than technical knowledge. And then the other thing that I really look for is depth of thought. And the reason I say that is biological discovery, therapeutic drug discovery, it's really hard. And it requires multiple layers, first order, second order, third order thinking. And if you're missing that second order effects of a decision or a design, you may not find out about those second order effects for months later and hundreds of thousands of dollars later. I would say you kind of drive to innovate and take some calculated risks, along with this idea of looking at things first order, second order, third order, this depth of thought to really anticipate things that could potentially stop the development from happening or be a problem that would only be seen months down the road, many hundreds of thousands of dollars later. And then, just like I said, some first principles understanding of what we're doing with drug discovery, kind of some fundamentals of biology, biochemistry, and it just can be just the fundamentals is fine. And then expertise in certain areas, maybe it's ML or maybe it's flipped. Maybe it's expertise in drug discovery, but first principles, kind of foundational knowledge in ML, just enough so you can jump between the lab and the computer fairly readily. So that's what I'm looking for.
Final question from me then, Matthew. When you're speaking to candidates, potential future employees about iBio, many of whom are looking at lots of opportunities in this space, what is it that you tell them about iBio, its mission, its environment, its impact that gets them excited enough to join you guys over some of the other great companies trying to hire those same people?
I think the biggest thing is really what we're able to do right now with all of the technological development and now at least 8 proven drug discovery campaigns. We've established ourselves as a leader in a couple areas, particularly this ability to really steer antibody drug discovery towards challenging targets, challenging therapeutic modes of action. And then we also have established ourselves as leaders in what's called mammalian display, which allows us to discover antibodies that we can actually develop into drugs. So with that leadership, we're now in a position where we can actually be the first team to get drugs that were previously almost unattainable. And even in our own campaigns and partner campaigns that we can't publicly disclose, but we're working on now, they, if successful, will be the first ever. And the downstream impact to that, not only in the field, but also to patients, is I don't even know how to overstate that. For me, the excitement is, okay, you get to work on cutting edge, cross-discipline technology, both computational as well as laboratory. And then if you're successful, that downstream impact of being the first ever to do a particular drug campaign successfully is huge, not only for later on in your career. Maybe you want to go out and start your own company later, which this would be a huge credibility enhancement to that, but also just from a life achievement legacy standpoint of turning on the television someday and seeing a drug that you actually developed on the screen, and maybe even hearing from patients who that drug has impacted. That really, I don't know how to better motivate people beyond that.
Matthew, thank you so much for coming on today and talking to us. I know we've been looking forward to this for a while. I really appreciate you sharing your journey, your own entrepreneurial background, but combining your interest in science and technology and how it's led you throughout your career, and giving us a great insight into the environment at iBio. It truly is one of the most exciting aspects of AI, and AI for good, given its advanced impact on therapeutics and healthcare overall. You've made iBio sound like a fun and interesting place to work, and I know there's a lot more growth in store. So for our audience listening, please stay tuned. Please keep an eye on iBio ones to watch for the future. We wish you, the team, and everyone at iBio the best of luck in the months and years to come, and we look forward to having you back on the show again in the near future.
Thanks, JP. I really appreciate the time, and my team appreciates you giving us an opportunity to talk about what we're working on, and we're hopeful that we can find some of your listeners who may want to work with us in the near future.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Alldus podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. We are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and any Android podcast of choice. You can also head over to our website, www.alldus.com, to listen to more podcasts, view our open roles, and stay up to date with industry news. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for more great episodes coming very soon.